Dam, blood, Svardea, frogs, kinim, lice. Our sages were certainly familiar with plagues, both those of the Passover narrative as well as the major outbreaks humanity faced throughout history. But they could not possibly have imagined the current pandemic that has plagued us for more than a year. COVID-19 has impacted every aspect of our lives, including how we do Seder. The novel coronavirus plague birthed the Zoom Seder, a new experience for so many of us last year, and for many, how we will celebrate Passover again this year too. For those who are vaccinated, of course, the vaccine is one of the greatest modern miracles. You may be able to sit at a table with a small group of friends and family this weekend. But still, things aren't completely back to normal. For so many of us, our lives were flipped upside down by the coronavirus, and another COVID Passover feels daunting. Unlike last year, when we had to quickly recreate the Passover Seder experience, some of us without access to the traditional foods or ritual items that we were accustomed to including on the table every year, this year is different. This year, grocery store shelves are fully stocked, and if we're still not shopping in stores ourselves, we're well practiced at ordering groceries online, either for delivery or pickup. This year, synagogues across the country and Jewish organizations, both big and small, had time to produce wonderful videos and curate other Seder supplements for us to use. What's different, though, as I've gleaned from conversations with others, as well as what I'm feeling myself, is our attitude towards the holiday. Our creative tanks are running low. Our tolerance for Zoom meetings is waning. Yet the guilt many of us feel just at the thought of not doing Seder, for our children's sake, or because that's what our parents would expect of us, is strong. Let me be clear. I'm not suggesting we shouldn't celebrate Passover this year. I too am feeling overwhelmed and somewhat depleted. And so I want to lift up some wisdom from our tradition that may help all of us with this year's Passover planning. Let's begin with this week's Torah portion, Parshat Tzav. Tzav, meaning command, includes God's instructions to Aaron and his sons regarding the sacrificial rites. The portion conveys God's careful direction to the priests for the burnt offering, the meal offering, the purgation offering, and the reparation offering, providing extensive instruction for what, when, how, and where the priests were to execute these 4 types of sacrifices. And I mean extensive instruction. Given the general terseness of the Hebrew Bible, this section of the Torah seems uncharacteristically full of minor details, addressing the total duration the fire should be lit on the altar, how it should be lit, what the priests were to do with the ashes afterwards, and even what they were to wear for the occasion. However, we miss a valuable lesson from this week's portion if we focus only on the detailed instructions and not the intention behind the text. As Rabbi Jonathan Sacks teaches, the dry prose of Leviticus and its sacrificial laws should not blind us to the fact that there was a profoundly effective dimension to the ritual sacrifice. It spoke to the heart, its hopes, and its fears. My teacher, Rabbi Rachel Adler, expands on this point, explaining ancient sacrifices may appear mysterious to us, the crude outpourings of blood and incinerations of fat and meat, but they too constituted a vocabulary for communicating with God. Behind the black and white text of Torah's instructions is an invitation for humankind to come near and build a relationship with God. And given the communal nature of some of the sacrificial rites, like coming to the priests on Passover, these ancient rituals were also opportunities for the people to connect with one another as well. We even find proof later in the prophetic writings that the rituals alone were not enough for God. Isaiah prophesied, "To what purpose is the multitude of your sacrifices to me? I'm fed up with the burnt offerings of ram and the fat of fat cattle. I have no delight in the blood of bullocks or lambs or goats. Bring me no more vain offerings." Time and again, Jewish tradition, we are reminded that God does not want us just to go through the motions, but to understand that rituals are not ends in and of themselves, but rather vehicles for connection and meaning. Therein lies wisdom to help us this year with our Passover preparation. Remember that the Passover Seder developed over centuries, with each subsequent generation adding rituals, contributing to the fullness of the experience we know today. At its core, teaches Rabbi Gamliel, is for each of us to discuss these three things: Pesach, represented by the shank bone or roasted beet; matzah, the unleavened bread; and maror, the bitter herbs. Notice our obligation is not to bless, nor to taste, or to lift up these fixtures of the Seder plate, but to discuss them, understanding that they are but ritual items, symbols representing loftier concepts, our relationship with God and God's presence or lack thereof in our lives, our own frailty and brokenness, and a call to empathize with our biblical ancestors' exodus from bondage, acknowledging that while we enjoy unprecedented levels of freedom today, we too still wrestle with our own enslavements. Surely this year we have each navigated our own Mitzrayim, our own places of struggle, tight control or narrow-mindedness. Perhaps they were the external straits of financial, marital, or medical problems, or the more solitary struggles of personal tragedy, mental health, or addiction. It's important that we read the Haggadah not simply as a storybook of our ancestors' journey out of Egypt, but rather a tool that encourages each of us to step into the story and wrestle with the holiday's big questions. As we read every year around the Passover table, in every generation, a person is obligated to look at oneself as if they personally had gone out of Egypt, immersing ourselves in the story and wrestling with one or a few of Passover's themes. It connects us to each other and to the larger Passover narrative to which we are all a part. The challenge for us this year is not how to recreate our family traditions on Zoom. We already did that last year. This year, our challenge is to delve deeper into what's behind the Seder plate and to lift up the powerful conversation starters found throughout the Haggadah. Let's allow ourselves to get lost in particular sections and forgive ourselves when we do not read every page. Let's think creatively around specific parts, especially if we're celebrating with children. Invite them to share what they learned in religious school and to have some fun finding the Afikomen. Sing Dayenu, or another Passover favorite. Beyond the traditional 4 questions, allow me to suggest a few more questions for you to discuss this year. Which of the 4 children, the wise, the wicked, the simple, and the one who does not know how to ask, speaks to us? What experiences of brokenness this year have contributed to our search for freedom? How do we transform our own hardships and pain in a way that frees us from bitterness? What are we grateful for? It may not be possible for us to do it all this year. We're tired. We've navigated these narrow straits of COVID-19 and its impact on every aspect of our lives for more than a year. Like we've had to do so many times this year. Let's tap into our creative reserves to honor the spirit of the holiday, honoring ourselves, the fundamentals of Passover, asking big questions, taking the time to consider our own responses and the replies of our loved ones, selecting rituals that help us to further our spiritual pursuits, connecting us to the Passover narrative, to each other, and dare I say, to God. Wishing you and your loved ones a meaningful Passover and a Shabbat Shalom.